Metacast Crypto Corner, brought to you by Naavik. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. Today, we are going to talk all about data and analytics and how to better understand the Web3 player. As the legendary engineer W. Edwards Deming put it, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And then on the other hand, as Jim Barksdale, is the founder of Netscape, joked, if we have data, let's look at the data. But if all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. And so that's kind of the framing for this episode today. Web 2 is the Deming's world, where there is data for everything to understand the user behavior. Web 3, as we mostly know by now, is very much a world of opinions and a lack of great data to analyze user behavior and player behavior. And so what we're going to be doing today is actually kind of a follow-on from a previous episode we did for the Metacast. We did an episode called Building the Web3 Marketing Stack. And that was a really surprisingly, perhaps, or maybe not surprisingly, popular episode. And we had a lot of follow-on questions and thoughts coming in from our listeners after that episode. And so what we wanted to do is not necessarily look at the marketing stack again, but really looking at that data and analytics question, which is why is there such a paucity of great data available in the world of Web3? In particular, kind of understanding that player behavior across Web 2 and Web 3. And so that's the lens for this particular episode. And to answer that question, we have a phenomenal guest today. He is called Nathan Snell. He's the founder of a company called Raleon, which is specifically building Web3 analytics tools. Raleon is all about getting actionable insights for Web3, which of course exists in Web 2 in spades, but just doesn't yet in Web 3. And we are going to get answers, not just to help with our marketing efforts for game developers in Web 3, but also to understand how to find more users, where to understand where are people congregating in Web 3, and then, of course, understanding your existing users better. So without further ado, Nathan Snell, great to have you here. Welcome to the pod.
Okay, thank you. Good to be here. And I listened to that other episode you mentioned. It was awesome. And I've been listening for a while, so happy to be here and help provide some hopefully good information.
Awesome. Well, we are going to drive right into this. So why don't we kick off with a quick overview of you, Nathan, kind of your journey into Web3. I know you've got a strong background in analytics from your prior Web 2 career. And then, of course, understanding what Raleon does. And then what is the current state of Web3 analytics? Why is it so hard to understand Web3 player behavior at this moment in time?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll spend just a brief time on my background, your point, and then we'll dive into the more fun stuff. So, so I came from Web 2. I spent more than a decade in fintech and actually was a co-founder of a company called Encino. You can see a little bit of the memento above me there. We took it public in 2020 at about a $7 billion valuation. So, very familiar with the fintech space in particular. That's actually how I got into crypto, was really, as you might suspect, from the fintech side, really getting to DeFi, observing it a lot from a company standpoint and a personal standpoint. And then really beginning of last year, left the company and I'd say fell further down the Web3 or crypto rabbit hole before ultimately talking with a lot of different projects and sort of hearing the same problems over and over, a lot on what you were just describing, right? Of people saying, that they can't understand who their users are, they can't engage with those users, they don't know how to connect the sort of Web 2 activity or business activity to things that happen on chain. And finally, after hearing about it from just about every project we talked to, big and small, it sort of became clear of there's a problem to solve here. And that's kind of what really led us into creating Raleon and the idea of building out this sort of Web3 specific, marketing analytics and sort of engagement platform was kind of the goal there.
Awesome. And I have a kind of a clarifying question. We so often say, we want to understand user behavior. We want to understand player behavior. Can you tell me what you mean by that? When we talk about understanding player behavior or user behavior, what does that actually mean fundamentally to you? And why build Raleon to better, solve that problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So for us, when I think about understanding user behavior and what that means, to me, it's really about, knowing what behaviors your users show so you can determine whether they're inclined to take the action that you want and being able to measure those results. And I know, depending on sort of what side you're on, that sounds, that sounds maybe very targeted, right? Of the actions that you want. But I think, on both sides, right? It lends itself to, if you're a game developer, like you want your users to be engaged, you want your core gameplay loop to be fun. So like those analytics become really important to improving the game. It also does become important to things like LTV and things of that sort of, making sure that, the offers that you're showing players are in fact attractive and they're, going to be something that's accretive to the player, to the game dev and things of that sort. So when we think about, what does understanding users mean, that tends to be how we sort of encapsulate that, right? Is it's, not just sort of understanding who the user is, which I'd say tends to be more like standard marketing demographics, right? But really understanding like how do they behave? And then how do we sort of help drive the right sorts of actions or understand the kinds of actions they want to take as a result of that?
And what do you think is the biggest gap right now between Web 2 and Web 3? I mean, again, Web 2 has an absolute plethora of tools for all kinds of things, as right down to literally like gaming genre specific tools, right? There will be certain analytics platforms that are like specifically for casual games or specifically for core games or whatever. And obviously across different platforms and form factors and iOS versus Android and so on and so forth. And that's just, obviously that there's been a lot more time for those to develop, over the years. What's the biggest gap, do you think, between Web 2 and Web 3? Like, what is the biggest hole or the biggest black box that is currently you're hearing from developers that you're talking to that they're like, I really wish I could do X?
So it's a great question. I mean, I think to me, it sort of breaks down into three areas. One is like on the pure Web3 data side, the majority of platforms and everything that have been available are predominantly like trader oriented, right? So it tends to be very macroeconomic. So usually when you talk about Web3 data, everybody thinks about Dune and Nansen, for example, which are both amazing companies. We use them, even like I use them personally. But when you think about like the kinds of charts or dashboards that you see on those, again, it's TVL, it's what's going up, with respect to it. A lot of those sort of macroeconomic or sort of macro community sort of aspects. And when it comes to understanding user behavior, right? Like, you may see sort of the long tail impact to those factors, but there really hasn't been anybody that has been focused on trying to get to some of that really, really challenging data, which kind of gets into the second point. It's like that's there, but really looking at it almost from like the wallet perspective, right, or the user perspective, and saying, okay, yes, like there's numbers are going up, and the TVL is this or what have you, but let's focus on the wallet and really start to apply an interpretation layer, if you will, to understand. Not just like, are the numbers going up or did a trade happen, but, who did a trade happen with and what was the amount for? And again, and just more of those sort of, more of those behavioral aspects, right, of the wallet. So that's one area. The second piece of that too is, and I kind of alluded to this, while the blockchain data is technically like public and available to everyone, that doesn't mean that it's easy to get access to, right? It doesn't mean that it's not complicated. So, you see some companies, and even early on when we were talking with some of the largest projects, some of the really big ones, they've grown this a little bit, right? But it's taken a lot of development and engineering time, data engineering and things of that sort, because even though the data is there, it doesn't mean that it's in a valuable state, right? So like if you think about Google, for instance, like technically web pages are public, right? Anybody can go out and index a web page. And yet Google's built obviously an entire empire on public data by making it useful, by making it actionable, and by being able to do something more with it. So that's kind of the second piece. And I think, the third, and then I'll stop, is really, we're seeing a lot of money going even from a VC standpoint into data, like investment wise. But even, one of the challenges we dealt with early on is, while there's more and more sort of data providers growing or APIs growing, they still tend to be largely focused on, making an NFT marketplace better, right? Or building, I call like a more lightweight, data-oriented dApp. It's not really geared towards, really in-depth, deep sort of big data analytics kind of volumes and analysis and sort of number crunching, if you will, that's required to get to, behavioral analytics or into sort of an insight, that's really simple, like, cool, like where did these new users come from, before us, right? So those tend to be the kind of the three things that we've seen to date that's been a challenge as far as like why aren't more projects able to actually get access to this.
So I want to great list there, and actually a lot of those I want to talk about. I'm going to go into the second one you brought up first, because this is almost the ultimate irony of blockchain in general, but for games in particular, which is this notion that everything is public, right? It's all there for anybody to look at, but it's just incredibly difficult unless you build your own tools, which most game devs don't want to do, or most developers don't want to do, right? They want to do what they're good at, right? And so as a game dev, I want to just focus on making a game and let somebody else deal with that data side of things. And so that's kind of the ultimate irony in my mind is everything that we're doing on chain is theoretically transparent and public, and we can just look at it and say, oh, okay, it came from here, and they have these other NFTs in their wallet, and this is what they did right before, and here are the transactions, and they're this active or that active. And the irony is that that's just really, really hard to do, or painful. Maybe it's not hard is maybe the wrong word, but painful to do, right?
And a little bit of both.
So, yeah, a little bit of both, right? And so, I'm curious to hear, how do you think about that problem? How do you think about that irony? In my mind, it is an irony because in Web 2, all of my game data is completely proprietary, right? Like, I'm not going to share what my players are doing with anybody else unless I want to share it, and that's something I'm doing deliberately, right? And here it's the polar opposite. Like, everything in some other game or some other dApp is completely there for anybody to look at least the on-chain part is, and we'll get to the off-chain part soon. And I'm just very interested to hear how you think about that problem, and how are you tackling that problem in terms of actually getting something actionable out of there, something that you can actually use, both for competitive intel and competitive analysis, but also, of course, for bettering your own product, making your own product more sticky.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there's a lot of different aspects of it. I mean, I think if I were to boil it down, to like how we tend to think about it is it's sort of twofold, and maybe in simple terms. One is like there's just the complexity of getting the data, right? And I think getting the data isn't particularly challenging. Like when you get into kind of the volumes that we're dealing with, right? You get into more infrastructure needs, but I'd say getting the data, like there's aspects of that, and being able to get it in the right format. I think being able to interpret it, right, is really one of the bigger challenges. So to your point, like even the idea of knowing, cool, so a player is holding some ERC20 token with some random address, right, and knowing like what does that address even mean? Like, and there's a whole sort of layer of enrichment that lives around that, right? So that's where I think a lot of people that start off or sort of embark to build it themselves, I think underestimate at times the complexity that goes along with like, okay, well, that's great that you like this player has the NFT, but there's a whole litany of other questions, which kind of gets to the second piece, to your point of like, how do you make this actionable, right? So at the end of the day, like good behavioral data is fundamentally actionable data, right? And that means that it needs to be sort of synthesized in a way that doesn't require, to your point, a game dev to spend hours analyzing a bunch of data, right? Ideally, it bubbles up in a way where you can look at it and go, okay, cool. Like I immediately understand what this says, and I know how to put it into action. So like with the NFT example, we've got projects, for instance, that use Raleon where, they've gone through and they've looked at, to your example, who are holding particular NFTs. But they don't just look at that, right? They'll say, okay, well, of those holders, how many were primary sales, right? In other words, they minted it for the first time versus how many of them purchased it secondary. And if they bought it secondary, how much did they pay for it? And like, are they flippers, right? So you get into like all these other dynamics, behavior become really, really valuable. But to your point, yeah, the data is there, but there's quite a lot of sort of number crunching, enrichment, things like that has to happen to be able to get to something as simple sounding as they have the NFT, they were the primary minter, and this is what they pay on average. And as a result, this is why you actually want to target them. So.
Great segue into one of the questions I've been wanting to ask. Player personas. Player personas are absolutely critical, in gaming in general, and understanding like who are you making this game for, where's it going to resonate, what are the demographics, where am I going to find these people, how do I keep them engaged, and that's one of the things it's relatively straightforward to do in Web 2 gaming, is to develop these player personas and then to target them through the various places that they congregate online, whether it be through websites or social or whatever. How is this different in Web 3? What makes building these personas, because I find this a challenge for us, how is this different in Web 3? How can game devs go about or start to think about developing better and more targeted player personas the way they can currently in Web 2? Which is not to say it's like, oh, it's so easy, like, oh, anybody could do it. Of course, it's still hard. You still have to understand like a lot of the psychologies that go into playing a certain kind of game, and why is this game going to resonate versus that game. But at least it's a known entity in Web 2. But in Web 3, it's really quite challenging to figure out how to do that. And that's something that I struggle with personally as a game dev, and I know others do too. And I'm very curious to hear, because it's a perfect kind of follow-up question for what you just talked about. How do we do this, and why is it different in Web3?
Yeah, it's just funny. I mean, I think I don't know. Like when I think about like the difference in Web3, and really to the points that you made, I don't think there's much of a strategic difference, right? I mean, to your point, like the value that personas provide in terms of being able to like cluster, right, or group users, for into whatever sort of categories you want, and as a result, being able to target them. I think like conceptually, the strategy of that for Web2 and Web3, at least from what we're seeing, I mean, is the same, right? It's the same sort of mentality. Where the challenge comes in, really so one of your first questions is there's just the access to the data has been really difficult to get. So until you had certain platforms available, that made it sort of no code easy. Basically the only the only way that you could do it was by going back and pulling the data yourself, having developers run through it, right? It was a very manual and arduous process. So to your point on the Web3 side, when it takes hours and hours and hours of really valuable developer time, right? Time where instead of making the game way more fun and awesome, which is what myself as a gamer, right? What I want, spending time doing something that's still valuable, right? But a lot of time into trying to make sure that that the personas of the game can grow in different ways. That becomes a really challenging trade-off, and that's largely because there hasn't really been good technology around to make it sort of push button easy, right, or no code easy. I think the other thing too of it is that there's if you're native to Web3, like the concept sometimes of even creating a persona, we find is newer. So we've actually been working with a number of different projects recently, actually going through this process with them, right? And we're finding there's different degrees of maturity and sort of understanding like how to create this persona strategy and how to execute it. And some of it's, we've got some folks that are, more Web2 native, right? And they have that understanding already. And they've even have sort of well documented, like, this is what we think our personas would look like. And then we can kind of work alongside them to say, great, well, here's sort of what that looks like, combining your Web2, Web3 data and so on. But then we have others, right, that it's more like they've heard it and they're like, hey, like, we know we need personas, but we're like, they're not sure, necessarily how to think about it. They don't know where to start on Web2 or Web3. So I think, even because of the paradigm, right, of you've got Web3 native folks that are making great things. You've got sort of Web2 folks kind of innovating and leveraging Web3. You've got some of those sort of down in place too that I think becomes sort of a learning curve challenge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to dig a little deeper on this personas piece because it's, in fact, this last episode I referred to, which is the Building the Marketing Stack episode, we had Quinn from Sky Mavis, and I had actually seen him or somebody from his team talk earlier about how they have a whole bunch of personas that don't really exist in Web 2 at all, and they're still very, very valuable. They want these people around. And these are personas who are, holders, but not players. They don't want to play the game necessarily, but they want to be a part of the decision-making process. They're in the DAO, for example. And there are a number of different personas that they identified that don't really exist in Web 2, but do in Web 3. And traditionally, you'd be like, well, if you're not playing the game, like, I don't know if you're valuable to the experience. But Sky Mavis finds that these folks in the Axia community are very valuable, even though they're not playing the game. And then, of course, there are the value extractive folks who are, just pulling value out of the economy. And I think those are just very unique Web3 specific things to think about. And I wonder, my follow-on question to you really is, I wonder how do you help folks understand and really uncover these types of personas that don't necessarily have an analog from the Web 2 world? How do you even start thinking about that? It's a really interesting area that I find fascinating personally as a developer, because understand, like, basically we're talking about human beings, right? These are all human beings. These human beings all play games or invest in NFTs or flip NFTs for whatever reason. Like, they all have their motivations, right? But they're all human beings ultimately. And data only goes so far. A data point can only tell you so much about that human being. And how do you go deeper? How do you get that extra insight to really uncover this notion of like, wow, like this is a whole different community of people that consists of gamers and holders and investors and owners and the DAO class and the folks who want to speak and the social whales and like it goes so much broader. I know I'm like kind of hitting this point pretty hard, but like it goes so much broader than what we've ever really seen in Web 2 or in any game in my career. Obviously, there's lots of different folk, but boy, like, is it different in Web 3, in my opinion? I'm just very curious to hear your thoughts on that. And how do you start to go about thinking about like uncovering these different types of personas and really figuring out what their relative value is or their relative importance is to your particular product or game?
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, there is, like, there's definitely sort of your more traditional personas that I think still apply, but you're right. There is sort of a much broader universe of like what, like what's important, right, to a project, that is really unique to Web3. And I think, the last part of what you're saying, to me anyway, is part of at least how, how we think about it and how we've been seeing successful projects like, the folks at Sky Mavis, starting to kind of tune them and get to like, what is the right persona? And that's really around measuring, right? So, at the end of the day, like, part of the value, and your quote kind of alluded to this at the beginning, is, you're making an assumption, right? And I think, part of the value of having this sort of user data and the behavioral data and the sort of marketing analytic data is, to be able to sort of, see what things could inform, right? The kinds of assumptions you want to make, be able to do the targeting around it, and then measure the results, right? So to be able to see, like what kind, how valuable is sort of a community whale or a DAO voter or what have you, overall to sort of the ecosystem. And then honestly, I think there's, and we're starting to find this already and start to kind of roll this out within our product, is there's also just new metrics, hopefully Quinn doesn't mind. I don't know how much you shared on it, but, Quinn and I were talking about, so like there's LTV, right, which is ultimately measuring the value of a player. But like as these ecosystems are growing more, Quinn was sort of describing even this idea of like the network LTV, right? So the idea of, there probably is, to your point, of the personas, not even just your player personas and what they look like, but your sort of ecosystem personas, right? And how do we make sure that, that those are being fostered in the right way and that they're valued in the right way? Because the last thing you want to do, right, as a game that's creating this thriving community is to inadvertently alienate, the community, right, or market makers or what have you that are not necessarily even playing the game, but are really excited about it, they're involved and engaged in what's going on. So there's things like that we're seeing, as well as, some of the stuff that we pull together analytics-wise, combining Web 2 is even the idea of like new engagements and wallet connections. So, if you think about like the sort of standard flow, of user activity, again, these are sort of new metrics that come out where it's like somebody could come to your game, and depending on kind of game it is, say it's a web-based game or a mobile game, maybe they connect their wallet, but then they never do anything, right? Well, like that's sort of a new sort of marketing funnel or onboarding funnel that has to be considered, versus somebody who connects their wallet, and maybe, and it's the first time you've ever seen them, and then they do something, right? So, there are a lot of these sort of newer, nuanced metrics, and I think, frankly, more as we all sort of, get better data and work together to kind of iterate and test and experiment. But I think it still fundamentally comes back to, you have to measure it, right? So I think being able to have a really easy way, to be able to do this targeting, and we see folks, in our product doing this today, where they'll create sort of broader personas or audiences, and then they'll go really narrow, right? Of like, okay, I want to know like how many people, just our primary sales folks, how many people, to your point, have been LPs, so like on the deck side, for instance, we've got folks that have targeted LPs, but it's like how many have been LPs on a specific exchange and have done these other things. And I think you start to, as a result of having the ability to create really narrow audiences in an easy way, can see, right? Like, is it working? Is it not working? What is the value of that? And do you adjust or pivot over time and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's amazing how in Web3, the importance of individuals becomes almost like so much bigger than it is in Web 2. You can have just one person or handful of human beings who can truly sway a community in one way or the other. And I'm not talking about the influencers and the shillers from crypto Twitter. I'm talking about the actual community members who are truly part of that community. And of course, that's always existed to a degree in Web 2, where you've had the players like people look up to. If it's a skill-based game, they're like, wow, this, or streamers in that genre of gaming. But it becomes almost outsized importance in Web3. And I wonder how does does the data analysis change in order to identify those people, or like, it's one thing to segment your player base and say, okay, we got this segment, this segment, this segment, this segment, and kind of understanding those personas. Kind of come back to that point. But here it's almost like, oh, we have these like 8 individuals who like, here's the DAO guy, like here's the social whale, here's the one who sets the tone for the gameplay, right? Is there a place for that in the data analysis, or is that more of a qualitative thing where you as the game dev and you as the community team needs to just be like, okay, I got to have the finger on the pulse on these individuals, but it's not really a data question, or is it?
I mean, I think a lot of it can still come down to data. I mean, so, in most cases, if it's happening on chain, right, then you can still run analytics on DAO votes. And again, if you're sort of blending Web 2 and Web 3 data, you can sort of draw the lines and the parallels, right, to say, oh, awesome, this user has been active in game, and they're also voting every single time, in the DAO or for whatever comes out. So, I think there's aspects of that, but also at the same time, right? I mean, to your point, like a community is fundamentally about relationship. So, from a data standpoint, I think the data should help do things at scale, right? So it's, in some cases it confirms gut intuition, it confirms assumptions, or it rejects assumptions, right, and shows that they're not right. But there still needs to be that sort of interaction, from game devs to the community. I mean, and there's always going to be, those folks, right, that are special, that like you can't really boil down into a single wallet and say, or user and say, oh yeah, like this user is clearly really valuable, because, like there's a point where like the trying to bring in data, right, to say, oh, well, this person's post, 1,000 times in Discord, like how valuable is that really, and how informative is that really? Hard to say. I think that's where it becomes more of having great community managers or marketing folks, right, that just have that engagement, and to your point, have the finger on the pulse. And I think that's especially true where, there's some games that I've seen that, have been driving this sort of, narrative-based concept where they have, effectively, DAO or token holders that can vote on like how things get named, right, or sort of what the next progression in the story looks like. And again, in those cases, those are also, to your point, like new sort of interesting things that don't happen in Web 2, but are still like, are they playing the game or are they not playing the game, right? Like, how much is sort of story evolution via votes, actually, become a part of the game? And I think, again, those can all be quantified, but ultimately in terms of the actual impact of community growth and everything else, I think that's where, yeah, there's data there, but ultimately it comes down to, being able to, again, sort of measure like, okay, is that something that's worth trying to scale and engage from a tracking standpoint? Or, does it come down to there is just sort of this tight-knit community and they're VIPs and they need to be treated, much like sort of early adopters or inside tracks, right, that folks have, that let's say, more competitive games have with sort of the pro gamers.
Yeah. We've been kind of skirting around this issue a little bit. I want to come straight into it, which is this notion of, and this is one of the biggest things for me, which is connecting the on-chain and off-chain activity. It's one thing to say, yeah, well, everything on-chain is transparent. You can, track it, you can look at it, and you can analyze it. But off-chain stuff isn't, obviously. And yet there are obviously very robust Web 2 tools to allow you to do that. And there are very, very, very few, if any at the moment, that really combine the two, the on-chain and the off-chain activity. And so you literally just made some examples where, okay, I have this holder, they have this many NFTs, they've bought them mostly in primary, they've bought these in secondary. Okay, that's all on-chain stuff. Cool. I can track that. But they also happen to have a bit large Twitter following, or they're very active in Discord, not necessarily my Discord, but somebody else's Discord, or they're in this many Discords. Like that's the magic that I would like to see happen, where you can really start to develop a very robust, it's a little Big Brother, of course, dystopian, like, okay, like we can track everything you do, but we can already. So like,
Fair. Yeah.
I think it's perfectly fair to say that it would be very valuable as a product, as a tool, to be able to connect all those dots across the different presences that they have, whether they be on-chain, off-chain, on social, XYZ, right? What's happening in that space? Like, what tools are we lacking at this moment in time to be able to do that? And what are you guys doing to make that more possible, or at least a little bit easier?
Yeah. I'd say with the last part, we're doing a lot. That's, I think, one of our core focuses from the beginning, and some of this is probably just coming from Web 2, right? Is when we talked a lot, with a lot of projects, and even still today, there's a lot of sort of like Web3 maxi going on, right? Which is not a bad thing in most cases, but when it comes to if you're a game dev and you're thinking about a user, like the reality is like we all start off as Web2 normies, right? Like if you come into Web3, like you came in through like a Web2 channel, whether that's crypto Twitter or games via App Store or what have you. You were at one point a Web2 normie before you became a degen or whatever it may be. So for us, we really took the approach to saying, like there is behavioral data, right, that exists in Web2 land today. Part of why it hasn't really been blended together, to date, in our view anyway. And what we've done is saying, if we can create Web3 sort of marketing analytic behavioral data from on-chain information, then we can actually marry these two things to create a really, really rich perspective and frankly, experiences that you couldn't create before in Web2 alone. I think a great example of this, that just sort of happened with us last week was, we were, talking with one of our customers and we saw sort of via our analytics and everything and talking with them that, they had, call it around, 3,000, what we call at-risk users, right? In other words, they hadn't really been active on chain for, in the last 30 days. But what we saw from the sort of cross-section of it is that at least 75% of those users had actually come to their website in the last 30 days, right? So to your point of like, what's sort of the value? I mean, suddenly you get into the situation where you're like, wait, if we think about a Web3 user, not as just the actions on chain, but as like the sort of holistic view of everything they're doing. Now, to your point, you suddenly get this really rich perspective where you can say, well, hang on, they're not doing things on chain with us, but they're still coming to our DApp or to our game. Like how do we make sure that we re-engage them when they come back? Because like, something's going on, right? Whether it's a lack of market fit or there's a feature lacking or something, right? So like, how do we make sure that we recapture their attention? Because presumably they've done something with us once or twice, they want to continue. And I think that's where some of that sort of value comes in. But again, but that's also more than just Discord, right? So I think, there's some projects that we see where they, they like all they want to know is like, okay, well, I want to connect Discord user and wallet, and I just want to know like, how many of the same. And like that can be helpful, but it's a very sort of it's a very thin, right, or a very shallow sort of layer of understanding. Versus being able to get into awesome. This user's come to your game, like their daily active user activity, is very high. They engage with all their things. They're doing things on chain, and now you can start to run cool even promotions in game because you can see sort of this cross section of heavy secondary market sales, to high end game activity and things like that. And I think that's really when you blend those two things together where the magic happens.
I'm going to switch gears a little. So, that is where the magic happens. I completely agree with you there. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. One of the things that in Web 2 is very, very effective, can be very effective, let's put it that way, is the idea that you're going to poach players from a competitor game, right?
Sure.
And there are lots of ways to do that. I mean, Facebook is obviously the best way to do it, but there are lots of other ways to do that too, through ad networks and other social tools and what have you. And I'm personally not at all ashamed to admit that I ran marketing for a classic style slots game, so mechanical single pay line through 3 symbol game, and back in 2014-15, we relentlessly targeted a competitor game that was on Facebook Canvas, but not on mobile yet. And so we were able to kind of make that connection between, okay, there's this audience here that's playing this game that's likely to be a very high affinity. We have a mobile product that they can't play at the moment on mobile because that game's on Canvas. We targeted those folks through all of Facebook's tools, and it was incredibly effective. Like incredibly effective. Like the conversions and the ROI and everything was incredible. And that's just not possible right now in Web3, unless I'm sorely mistaken. If it is possible, you tell me, because I'm going to go and start doing that. But is this a thing? Is this kind of like, okay, I can identify a competitive product. I can literally find a single tool, in this case, Facebook, allows me to target these players and essentially poach them from this competitor. And then vice versa, of course, there's the flip side, which is like, okay, how do I know if somebody's doing this to me? Like, how can I, better engage my players in my product to prevent this from happening to me, right? And this is something that is very much, I think, nascent in Web3. There have got to be a lot of competitive products where I mean, let's take a very obvious example, just, NFT communities, right? Let's not even talk about games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are certain NFT communities that are clearly just a great fit for a new and upcoming NFT community to go and target. But other than doing it one by one by one, there isn't really a great way to have a set of tools or use data and analytics to actually identify where these folks might be. And so that's really the question for you here is that a thing? Is anybody developing this? Are you developing this? How can I go about actually identifying communities of users in competing products and target them with my messaging, with my product, and try to bring them over?
Yeah. I mean, selfishly, that's what we've built. I mean, that's a big part of what we built. So, and honestly, that's one of the areas that I'd say gets me, that gets us most excited is this idea of how do we provide that level of targeting? So for us, I mean, our sort of premise, right, kind of from the beginning was, again, in order to be able to actually target people effectively, you have to understand those behaviors. So we started off deep on the analytics side and then sort of built out targeting and have been building out the sort of engagement and reach piece on that sort of understand to reach, concept. And so for us, yes, it's possible. I think, not dissimilar to the question, but, to the question earlier of, like, why do we see less people doing it today? Because, until, say, a platform like Raleon, like it's been possible, but kind of the complexity of data and everything else, it's been really expensive. And in some cases, right, as a result, impossible to do. And so, to your example, one of the things, just as a for instance, to the kind of targeting that you were describing. So we were working with a project, and one of the things that they were doing was sort of flexing the targeting capability that we have within the Raleon platform. And to exactly your point on the community side, I took a note on the different things they looked at. So the game was specifically on Polygon, and they were looking to do an NFT drop. And honestly, it was really cool actually, because they even sort of took it past what some of the stuff we had thought about. But they were looking at wallets that were playing similar games, on different chains, and they were using us to also then look at, like, of those wallets, which ones actually played games on them. So they use us to also see, like, which ones had been active in sort of we call them categories, but, like, the gaming category or DeFi. So we have sort of different kind of high level insights within our platform, but basically saying, okay, how many of these users have been active in the gaming category or with games on Polygon in the last 30 days? How many of them are a part of the following NFT communities? What types of games have they played? And then, like, what kinds of NFTs do they hold? So they kind of went through this, this big list of stuff to ultimately create, a very targeted list of wallets that they then ran through a variety of sort of acquisition tests, right? So some of it was, more normal ads, say Twitter, crypto Twitter kind of ads. They did some sort of crypto native ads, inclusive of even some, like, I'd say, like, NFT based ads, like airdrop sort of ads to wallets. And side aside there is some additional alpha. Those don't work. So, like, I think the overall number of views that they even got was like less than 1%, and it was 0 conversions. So in case you're debating dropping random NFTs into wallets, turns out that, yep, people do in fact think they're complete scams and they don't click on them. But
well, that's actually super useful because that happens all the time, obviously, and I haven't actually heard definitively anybody actually come out and say they don't do jack shit. You're telling me they don't do jack shit. I mean, I suspected as much, but okay, there you go.
Early data would be an indication that they don't work yet. Now, and look, I mean, I think over time, I mean, to me, that's a really exciting area to innovate. So I think, like, as wallet providers, provide better tooling around it and that sort of thing and better experiences, like, that'll probably change over time. But yeah, right now, on a pretty good sized campaign, from what we saw, the results were, I'd have to go back and double check, but I don't think there was a single conversion that happened. But it's kind of back to your initial question. That kind of targeting has been really difficult, right? If not impossible before. And honestly, a lot of the time that we spend with our targeting capabilities is to be able to provide that sort of visibility, right? Who's, what, not just, what's, what are users doing, but, what kinds of users, right? Could you actually bring in? And then again, tracking, right? So to even see, okay, if you're doing, some kind of vampire attack or promotional campaign or ad or what have you, like how much does that audience even actually and is it worth your sort of continued time, money, and effort? So.
Yeah, this actually brings me to vampire attack. I have actually honestly not heard this phrase before. I probably should have heard this phrase before. But when I was researching this episode, I going through your website, and you actually even mentioned vampire attack on your website. And so I had to ask the question, what is a vampire attack? How do you do an effective vampire attack? how effective are they, I guess?
I mean, I think they've proven pretty effective thus far. So a vampire attack really is when one project targets another project's users, really in an effort to acquire them, usually by offering some kind of incentive, right, or some kind of reward. So like the most popular example is like LooksRare, when they launched effectively with a vampire attack on OpenSea. And the way that attack worked is they basically said, if you're an OpenSea user and you have spent, I think it was, more than a certain amount of ETH using OpenSea, then you can come to LooksRare and claim some number of Looks tokens for free, right? So that was one of the early vampire attacks. And if you look at LooksRare, I mean, like they were able to sort of bootstrap the community as a result. They did some other kind of incentive campaigns to kind of keep it going, and obviously they're a marketplace that's in place now. So I think in terms of can they be successful? I mean, I think as with anything, like if you do it right, I think in this case, the data thus far anyway shows that vampire attacks, can be successful. But again, I think some of it comes to as well of doing it in the right way. So another example would be, we've got a game that we're working with, and they're looking at doing a vampire attack. And one of the really cool things actually that I liked about it, and this to me was a really actually neat, almost like sort of culture setting, for the game where, they did sort of the normal stuff like you were actually mentioning targeting wise, where they said, hey, players that play these games or have NFTs from these things on chain, we think would really like our game. So they built a list around that. But then they also said, there's a handful of games that some of them they had played and they had just kind of watched, through say FTX issues and things like that, collapse, right, or implode or into treasury issues or things like that. And they said, we want to they were saying they want to call like a targeted airdrop just to players that have sort of, that have almost been like disenfranchised, if you will, right? Like from those games. So almost as a way of saying like, hey, like we know you were in this, it stinks what happened, but, we want to invite you in and reward you for being a longtime holder of this thing that sort of went defunct and things like that. And I think that's honestly a great way too, right? To be able to say, look, there was an active community here. Let's sort of vampire attack, but almost like in a positive way because the value isn't there anymore, to say, come join us and we'll incentivize, and we'll, even give you a reward, right, for sort of, your loyalty to this previous game and that sort of thing.
We've talked a lot about new users and bringing in users from other projects to your project, to other games to your game. What about your existing users? That's another area where you could arguably start using some of the Web2 tools in order to, once you've got the users in your community, once you've got the gamers, the players playing your game, you can arguably use almost, any of the Web2 tools. But how do you see it being different in Web3? Is there a difference between effective lifecycle management in Web3 gaming or Web3 products in general versus Web2? What data is different? What data is the same when looking at, okay, is this player engaged? Are they retaining properly? Are they coming back on the right days when I think they should be coming back? Are they doing the right things, taking the right actions? That a lot of that is very traditional, data analytics, user analytics. But how is that different in Web3? What have you seen different projects, products, teams do differently from Web2?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. It depends on the audience a little bit, but what we see is actually a lot of Web3 games, unless you really came from gaming from a strong background, aren't even running analytics. And then to your point, some are running call it like a lightweight Web2 analytics, but few that we've seen are running really in depth Web2 analytics alone. Almost none. I mean, it's just to say a very, very small portion are running some kind of Web3 analytics on top of that. But again, usually if they are, it tends to be like the Dune dashboard, right? The more like macroeconomic thing of here's the total token supply and here's what TVL looks like and things of that sort. So, I'd say not sort of meaningful to driving player engagement, as it were. And again, I think some of that is even, like with Raleon, we're starting to see some of that change because we're being able to say, hey, look, if you're using a Web2 tool, awesome. If you want to use ours, awesome. But let's go and take all that really rich Web2 behavioral data, combine it with the on-chain data. And as a result, you can start to really, move from these kind of generic experiences in some cases, right? These really personalized, tailored experiences that bring the two things together. And when we think about that and sort of what that looks like, a really cool instance that, that came up recently. So, like I mentioned before, the idea of, we're starting to do a lot more on the engagement side, right? So it's sort of, once you understand folks, the natural question is, you have the insight, you want to do something with it. And in particular, when it comes to engaging players and keeping them active, what we've been, one of the things that we've rolled out recently is what we call an action prompt. So one of the things that we really liked idea-wise from the game that we're working with is this idea of being able to have this really hyper-personalized or hyper-targeted and personalized experience, such that when they're in the game and the player's been active after a certain period of time, if they're holding NFTs on chain, if they're sort of contributing in these different ways, and they get this very specific action prompt that actually draws them deeper into the community, right? So if they click on it, then it gives them an actual special role within their Discord community as a whole. And I think that's where you start to get, to kind of your question earlier, this really neat crossover where, like a gamer is one, like there's a grouping of personas that's maybe gamers, but then there's also this other grouping of personas that you can still really connect with and engage that might be, deeper community members, and maybe they don't play but once a month, right? But the impact they have more broadly is really high, and you want to reward that, right? So by blending that stuff together, you can start to provide these really, really neat and sort of tailored experiences. Another one's onboarding. So to your point on, if you're targeting somebody, if you're targeting, say, Axie Infinity players, by being able to blend the two data sets and engage players, you can actually say, cool, you came and we know that you played Axie Infinity. So maybe maybe the landing page for them in game is totally different, and the steps that you ask them to take is different, and the rewards you give them up front are different. So that sort of engagement, I think, can start to really, transform almost as if if you were playing a game on Steam, if you knew all the achievements somebody could have and you could gamify that more, it's sort of that same concept, right? Of imagine having that sort of data available in a way that you can make actionable.
What's the biggest surprise? You obviously get to see a lot of different projects and products and not just games. What's the biggest surprise for you? Obviously you've come from a rich background of data and analytics and fintech and, presumably a world of numbers, lots and lots of numbers.
Lots of numbers.
what is the most surprising thing that you've seen, in Web3 that you haven't seen in Web2? What's the biggest shift, I guess, from user behavior, player behavior from that world and this world? And maybe there isn't one, because then again, these are all human beings, right? Human beings are human beings, and they're complex individuals. And so you wouldn't expect somebody to be totally different just because they're engaging with Web3. But I'm very curious to hear if you have any insights around what's the biggest, weirdest thing that you've seen that you're like, wow, I've not seen this before, or this is 10x bigger or smaller or whatever compared to what I'm used to from previous experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that stand out most immediately, is really, I mean, the community is an obvious side, right? The level of community engagement is one, but I think even within that, this the value of an NFT or a digital collectible, right? Whichever sort of the more casual version, right? Digital collectible versus NFT, the value of ownership, right? And players getting that. It's amazing to see the results of in the desire for players to be able to actually to own something and what that concept looks like. And I think it's neat to see Limit Break and some others really doing and pioneering ideas of free to own and even the NFT factories, right? I don't know if that term will stick, but some of those concepts that are happening. But what's really neat is just the more that we've been kind of watching it, even as I've been thinking about it, there's almost this aspect where it's Web3 is almost sort of inherently gamified, right? Because all this stuff is on chain, because you can things you sort of have this level of inherent gamification that doesn't really exist on the Web2 side. And I think honestly, what's really neat is we'll see that continue to evolve in Web3, which will play really well for game devs, because again, the data we've been talking about and the ability to take action on it, we've been talking about, as that continues to evolve, I think those that are on the forefront, game dev wise, will be able to have a really great opportunity to, capture new users at a cost that, that was probably lower than what they experienced before, retain them in ways that were lower and really have almost a little bit more of an open landscape to be able to sort of gamify aspects of the game, right? Or of engagement that, that wasn't possible, wasn't as popular previously, that is now becoming, I think, what will become more commonplace. And frankly, I think what we'll see too is actually Web2 games, and this is some of where we're looking to, and where they're going to want to say, hey, we want to bring that same concept to Web2. So I think, I would anticipate over the next year, we'll see a lot of innovation happening in Web3. I wouldn't be surprised if in 24, we don't start to see a lot of Web2 games adopting sort of kind of Web3-esque concepts to drive some of this really cool, new ways of engaging users that haven't really been possible in the same way before.
Yeah, so I mean, I shouldn't be surprised by this because we see this every day, but you calling out this idea of digital, like pride in digital ownership as a concept. It's existed, of course, up until this point, but it somehow has really had a step function change upwards with the notion of NFTs and digital collectibles and Reddit and doing what they did. And that is something that, whether or not we end up calling them NFTs, which we probably won't in games into the future, they've gotten a bit of a bad name recently, or being associated with crypto or whatever. But like this notion of digital ownership, the uniqueness, rarity, things like that. Of course, that's always existed. But I feel like there's been a real cultural adoption of that concept over the last couple of years. And I think you're right. I think that's, to me, shouldn't be surprising as a longtime game dev. People do take pride in their game assets, of course, always have, always will. But it feels different this time in a way where you are actually showcasing that digital collectible or NFT in ways that hasn't really happened in the past. And this notion of uniqueness hasn't really existed in gaming up until this point. And I do think that is one of the things that has really changed user behavior in some ways, because you are not just playing a game and doing well in it and earning loot and getting stuff, but you actually are playing with your thing, your asset, your character, your whatever, right? Really interesting to hear you kind of that. To me is intuitive, but I'm glad to hear that the data that you're seeing from multiple projects kind of backs that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think a lot of ways, a lot of game devs are taking that bet, right? They're like, well, we've heard about digital ownership, we've heard about NFTs, we've heard about people spending a bunch of money on, on characters and what have you, and cool, that's interesting. Let's lean into that. But I think a lot of leaning in has happened at the financial level, or oh, look, there's a financial reason to do this. I think fewer game devs have really leaned into what does it actually mean to own a digital asset, your game character. Anyway, I could philosophize about this for a long time, because this is a really fascinating topic to me and really intriguing. And I'm just very glad that you're here to kind of validate from a broader data set that yes, that is a thing that you're seeing that hasn't necessarily been as true as it is now from Web2.
Absolutely. And, awesome. And honestly, I think there's a really neat opportunity, even with that, for game devs to explore that space. I mean, you see folks like Azuki, for example, where, even the idea of you own a particular digital item, and as a result, it sort of unlocks a physical item for you. And I could see, in a world where it's if you're a fan of, I'm a fan of, card games and things like that, whether it's digital or otherwise. And, the idea of being able to take even this, even something that I own digitally, and now all of a sudden, what gets shipped to me is some physical rendition of that, right? And it's wow. So, even that sort of, I think the crossover aspects of that will become really interesting. And you can even see the evidence of if you look at if those projects that use digital goods or collectibles from a marketing standpoint, right? So they'll say, hey, if you retweet this, you get this NFT, 100% of the time, right? Then, the retweets on those sorts of, actions versus ones without the reward, is higher, right? So I think, we're going to see that continue to evolve. And honestly, it'll be great to see, what kinds of ideas folks come up with and how kind of those sorts of interactions innovate and what that drives.
Yeah. So we're building on Solana, and there was a recent kind of hype moment, meme moment, where if you're a holder of certain projects, you would get airdropped this coin called Bonk.
Yes, Bonk.
And I got a bunch of Bonk, and I was on vacation when I got it. And then I saw everybody tweeting about Bonk. I was like, okay, what's going on here? Oh, Solana's back. Crypto's back. Yay, back to the bull market. My Bonk ended up being worth not an insignificant sum. And I was like, cool. And I did sell it. I've learned my lessons from 2022. But the point I'm making there is it because it's on chain, because it's Web3, you can do things that okay, I'm going to reward people who are holders of X, Y, and Z. And you can't really do that in the real world, right? In Web2, it'd be quite hard to identify people who actually hold, I can identify that you've played a certain game, but I don't know if you actually still own that game, or you still play that game, or you're active in that. And that's the kind of stuff that I think you're right. gets really interesting really quickly in Web3. And it's not necessarily about digital ownership. It's about what you can do when there's this level of transparency around what you actually own at that moment in time, or where you've actually been active, or like how many times you did X, Y, or Z. And that's really interesting, both from a marketing perspective, but also from you mentioned Web3 is gamified by definition in a way that Web2 really isn't. It really does gamify the entire ecosystem in a way that is really unique and really fascinating. And I don't really have a core takeaway on this one, but it's just the idea that you can go and identify people based on what they actually own and what they're actually doing at this moment in time, and then do something meta around that, whether it be airdrop bonk or whatever. That's just a silly meme, but it does open up doors in really interesting ways. And I think the data is going to be needed in order to be able to, because one of the things that bonk didn't do is they punished DGods, which is the biggest NFT project on Solana,
for leaving,
because they're leaving. And so it was like this whole thing, it was like this whole drama around like, well, DGods holders didn't get any. And anyway, yeah. But that's where you need that data, right? Like you need that data in order to identify like these are the people. This is this community of people who hold these particular projects, and they've taken certain actions, and I can now do something, right? Something actionable around that information, and that has just not been true in Web 2. So
absolutely.
Anyway, I'm very grateful for what you're doing and what you're building. One of my big passions is data analytics, really trying to understand that user journey, all the way from acquiring the user through lifecycle management to when they inevitably at some point decide to leave. Understanding that journey has to happen through data, and there's really no other way to do that. Otherwise, it's just an opinion, right? To go back to the very beginning.
Absolutely.
So anyway, go ahead.
No, I was just say that's I'd say with a lot of projects that we've worked with, that's been the starting point, right? And that's what we've heard a lot of is it's like, suddenly, you kind of flip on the lights and you can see what's going on in the room, and you can start making some of those decisions. And, and even like, the stuff that you're getting excited about on the digital side and the gamification side, which I think is spot on, is, like as platforms, like ours, become available and make some of these things easier, it'll be neat to see that sort of next wave of innovative and creative ideas happen, because suddenly all that stuff becomes unlocked versus, being stuck in a situation where you're like, well, I wish I could measure it, but I'm going to do the best with what I have now, right? Now what that is quite a lot more. So a lot more should come.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what has happened in Web3, so I mean, I know it's a cliche to say we're so early. We are so early. A lot of it so far has just been, like, oh, look, that seems to be working. I'm going to copy that, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But that's not really very data-driven or data-informed approach. It's just like, oh, look, that looks like it's successful. I'm going to do the same thing. And there's really not been any way of measuring what success or failure looks like, or whether that even was successful in the first place, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's the next wave that's going to unlock the next set of innovation in Web3. I mean, I'm a big believer that Web3 is here to stay, and this is absolutely a movement. It's just going through a bit of a blip, just like many movements do. And I think that data and analytics is the thing that's going to unlock the ability for developers, game developers and others too, just developers in general, to unlock those user insights and really get that next wave of adoption and innovation happening. So, all right. Well, with that, I think we have reached the end here. I just want to say a huge thank you, Nathan, for being on the pod again. Very appreciative of what you're building, what you're doing. Very valuable stuff, and more valuable than people really give data credit for. Data is incredibly valuable. We also want to say a big thank you to our listeners. We will be back next week with more interviews, more insights, more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send requests for guests, questions, or any feedback to me. My email is nico@naavik.co, and you can always find me on Twitter @NicoTheFin. DMs are always open. Nathan, thank you once again.